Hi, I'm Gary White with Channel 6, Central Kentucky Television. I'm here with State Senator Jimmy Higdon, who represents Marion County and Nelson County in our area, but also Casey County, and goes all the way up to Louisville, kind of goes all through Central Kentucky.
Right from almost Lake Cumberland to almost the Ohio River.
Right.
and I'm 8 miles from the courthouse in Washington County, and I don't represent Washington County, but that's okay. You know, I still have strong ties with Washington County, and it's always good to hear from those folks.
And during this term, there will be potential for redistricting.
That is correct.
There's potential that could change.
The census will start, you know, right after January the 1st, and you know, I think this year you'll hear more talk about the census than ever before, because every state wants to make sure that all their residents are counted. You know, there was talk of, you know, last census as many as 12,000, I think, kids were not, our young people were not counted. So there's going to be a lot of emphasis to make sure that everybody's counted. So that'll start really right after the first year and
2020.
2020. And so as we go through the census and we get the details back in, you know, 2021, and we'll be talking about redistricting, and probably early in 2022, we will go through that redistricting process. And one of my goals in redistricting would be to get Washington County back in my district. I've always said that Marion, Washington, and Nelson need to be in the same senatorial district. So that's one of my goals, Gary. We'll see how that works out, and we'll go from there. But you know, the good news is that you know, the census will start you know, early January 2020, and it'll be interesting to see, you know, the demographics of Kentucky continue to change. We have, you know, in the east and the west, and then southern Kentucky continues to lose population. In the middle, the Golden Triangle, the middle of Kentucky, continues to gain population. So we'll see how that all shakes out. And as that happens, it changes, you know, one of the purposes of census, have taken the census, is for redistricting. And you know, the U.S. Constitution says one person, one vote. So on a particular day when they count all those folks, and the congressional districts in Kentucky will all have plus or minus one person. They will all be the same size on one particular day, and after that they grow or shrink.
Right.
So you know that we'll be doing that, and same with the legislative districts, Senate and the House. They're not with plus or minus one person; they're plus or minus 5%. So we have a little leeway from the courts on how many people are in a legislative district. So the census is important so we can redo the Senate districts and the House districts, that you know that they are of equal size, and it's one person, one vote.
Right. But today, the big thing we're here to talk about is another thing that's going to happen in 2020, and that is the beginning of the Real ID being enforced. And it's actually a year from now, October of 2020. Not too long ago, Jimmy and I were here talking about Real ID here in Kentucky, what that is and the need for it and stuff of that nature. But we're going to talk more about it, who needs it, who doesn't need it, because not everybody does need to get the Real ID. That's correct. Right? And the deadline is set for federal purposes, for planes and stuff, for October of 2020. But tell us, where's Kentucky in the...
Well, right now, of course, it's set to go into effect October the 1st of 2020. And October 1st, 2020, you will need a Real ID, an ID that's declared secure by the federal government to be, you know, to get on a airplane, to get on a military base, to get in a federal courthouse or a nuclear facility. And that's federal law that was passed right after 9/11, and it's taken all these years for it to come into play. And so we're out of time now. We've talked about this Real ID for years, and so October 1 of next year of 2020 is when it goes into effect. Now, Kentucky last month rolled out a pilot program, and I think it was, I know it was Franklin County and Woodford County, and it didn't go real well. There's some bugs that it needs to be worked out. So it's kind of back to the drawing board on that. So I'm sure that they'll have those worked out, and after the first year, it'll be rolled out again, and everybody will have till October 1 that needs it. And that's the main reason I wanted to meet today and talk about it, Gary, is that not everyone has to have a real ID.
Right.
If you have no intentions of flying, getting on an airplane next year, you have no intentions of visiting a military base, or you have no intentions of visiting a federal courthouse. There's no nuclear facilities in Kentucky, but if you were going to visit a nuclear facility, you had to have a real ID to do all those things. So really, a large portion of Kentuckians will really do not need a real ID. So if you hear the need to get a real ID, just ask yourself if you don't intend to fly, you really don't need the real ID. Now, we don't always know when we need to get on an airplane. So if it's possible that you will, you might want to consider getting the real ID. But the standard driver's license that we have now will be good. It will do anything that you want to do. It will, again, the real ID does not replace the current Kentucky driver's license. They're still good. You can
still drive.
You can still drive. You can still get your regular driver's license. It will not serve, your regular driver's license will not get you on an airplane. Okay.
Right.
So
after October 1st.
After October 1st of next year. I'm glad you're clarifying it. But one of the things, so probably a good portion of Kentuckians, probably half of Kentuckians, and I'm just guessing that, I don't have the numbers, probably half of Kentuckians do not need a real ID, especially right at the beginning. Mm-hmm. As they go forward, they will. And the difference between a real ID and a regular driver's license, a real ID driver's license, right now, if you go to get your driver's license renewed, you just have to show up, give them your old driver's license, get your new driver's license, and pay them. With a real ID, you have to show up and you have to jump through a lot of hoops. You have to, number one, you have to have your birth certificate. Now, I don't know if you're like me. I really don't know where my birth certificate is. Right. I can go look. It'd take me a while to find it. Before my mother passed away, or before she moved to a nursing home, I always knew where it was at. It was at her house.
Right. Exactly.
And so a lot of people really don't know where their birth certificate is, but to get the real ID, you have to have your birth certificate, you have to have your Social Security number and Social Security card, and proof of address. You had to have those things when you show up to get your real ID. So that's the drastic difference. You have to be able to prove that you're a U.S. citizen and to get this real ID. So it's a very involved process.
Yeah. So if you have a passport already, you could use that passport.
That's correct.
You wouldn't need the real ID at all, because you could use that passport to do any of those four things, right?
That's correct. And that's good. Yeah. You put me right into my next my next thing. You set me up perfect. So what I'm going to do, Gary, I have a passport. So I'm in the process of ordering a passport card. Uh-huh. A passport card is just like a driver's license. It goes in your you can carry it in your billfold or purse. It's not as bulky as a passport, and it will serve as a real ID. It won't serve as a driver's license, but it'll serve as a real ID. So I'm going to have my current Kentucky driver's license, and I'm going to get me a passport card. 25% of Kentuckians, 1/4 of Kentuckians have a passport. So if you currently have a passport, you can go online and get the paperwork and do a passport card. It costs $30. And so one of the requirements, you have to go get a photo, mm-hmm. and there's places in town that provide, you can get a passport photo. Right,
because it has to be on the white backdrop and all that kind of stuff.
And you go online and print out the paperwork. Uh-huh. And you send that in with a check for $30 to, the passport, and get you a passport card. Okay.
Okay.
That's what I intend to do. Like I said, there's my paperwork there. I'm in the process of doing that. That will take care of my real ID requirement. It's very simple. Okay. And I encourage, that's why I wanted to do this, to encourage people to go ahead, especially if you have a passport. For 1/4 of the viewing audience that has a passport, go ahead and order your passport card if that's what you'd like to do, instead of waiting for the real ID. Very simple, very easy to do, and come October the 1st next year, when some people are scrambling around to get their real ID, you're all hooked up, you're ready to go. You can have that in your pocket. Now, and some if you've ever had the thoughts that you want to get a passport, now would be a good time to start thinking about getting a passport and a passport card. I think together it's about $140 to get a passport and your passport card. Now, when you do that, if you've not had a passport before and you do that, you have to go through almost the same requirements as you do for the real ID. You have to have your birth certificate, proof of address, and and you do that. You can't do that by mail. You can get a passport card if you already have a passport. You can do it by mail. To get a passport for the first time, you have to go to the post office, and only selected post offices do that. And I'm telling you this off the top of my head, so I'll probably forget some. The post office in Camelsville does it. The post office, I think, in Nerix. Sisters Loretta post office does it. The post office, I know the one in Taylorsville does it, and also the post office at the Sisters of Charity, and I forget what the name of that one is.
Nazareth.
Nazareth. The post office there also does it. So, and you can go there with that. You have to have, it'd be good to call ahead of time. Some of them have certain hours that they do passport related stuff. You have to call them ahead of time and make sure that what their times are, and find out what paperwork you need to bring. And so that is a good way to do it, to avoid the hassle of getting the real ID. And you have something that a lot of people want to get anyway. A lot of people would like to have a passport. It's a good opportunity and I guess a good motivation to go ahead and get the passport card.
You're going to travel outside the country, you'll need it.
Right, yeah. And get your passport and the passport card. So now I said the one that the Sisters of Loretta, the post office there, did did passports. I don't think they do. I think it's just the one at in Barstown, the Sisters of Charity at Nazareth. Now that I'm thinking about it, but I do know Camelsville, Camelsville Post Office, Taylorsville, and Nazareth, and those post offices will do your passport, or you can just order a passport card, but you have to have the same information. And I think passport card without the passport is $55, but if you already have the passport card and you can do it by mail, it's only $30.
So the passport card is just a small card that can fit in your wallet.
Right.
Or your purse.
It's just like it's the same size as your driver's license.
Right. And you can use that. So if you got that, you would not need the real ID whatsoever. You can use that to get onto all four of the different things you talked about, right?
That's correct.
If you already have a passport, you could also use that to get onto
That's
them.
correct.
You'd have to carry the larger
passport
book, and you don't want to lose that because you need it.
Right.
And that's a hassle.
Well, it's not convenient to pack around with you.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's inconvenient to replace it.
Right. If you already have a passport, can you use that information to get the real ID, or the real ID won't use? No,
they're not interchangeable. I've asked that question, Gary, and because you had to have all the same documentation, and I think they're checking on that. I think that they will eventually change that you could take your passport in, and since you had a passport, you could get the real ID. So we're working on that. I think that's that'll be future legislation that will pass and get that cleared up. But there is a lot of confusion about Real ID.
Right.
I hope I haven't added to the confusion, but I just want to make the point that not everybody has to have a Real ID.
Right.
If you don't plan to get on an airplane mainly, if you have no plans, if grandma's doesn't want to fly and you don't think she'll ever fly, or grandpa, you don't have to panic about them having a Real ID come October the 1st
Right.
next year.
They can still drive with their driver's license and do whatever they need to with that.
And a 16 or 15-year-old that's getting ready to get their driver's license, when you first get your driver's license in Kentucky, you got to produce your birth certificate. And so it would be convenient for someone just getting their driver's license to go ahead and get a Real ID, because they have to already produce the birth certificate and all the steps it would take for the Real ID.
Right.
I'm just trying to make it easy for people who especially for those who have gone to the trouble of already having a passport. And like myself, I'm going to get the passport card, which is very inexpensive and very convenient to have in my pocket. I like the traditional Kentucky driver's license, and so that's the route that I choose to take. And so everybody will have to choose what route they want to take, but it's federal law, it's not state law.
Right.
It's federal law that you had to have a Real ID. And what the difference between a Real ID and a Kentucky driver's license is, a Real ID is a secure document. It's very difficult to duplicate the Real ID. So it's a very secure document.
So for the Real ID, for the passport card, you can go ahead and do that now.
Sure.
That's if you do have a passport, you can get the passport card. The Real ID is not something you can currently do. It's not
available. Like I said, it rolled out in the as a pilot project in Franklin County, and they discovered some bugs with it, and so they've got some work to do on it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that'd be rolled out again after the first year when they get the bugs worked out, and it will return.
Yeah.
But again, as we start getting toward October the 1st of next year, I just, if you can do something now and avoid the rush to do this, because it will take some time to be able to get your Real ID. It won't be something that's real simple. Now, after we get through the initial distribution of Real IDs, once you show that birth certificate and all that is on file, the next time you go to get your Real ID renewed, and of course a Real ID is good for 8 years. When you go get it renewed the next time, you don't need all that documentation. You only have to go through the documentation phase one time.
Right.
So,
and for your passport too, if you are thinking of doing a passport, give some time for that too, because that's not a quick process either, because they have to process through that whole thing too. But it is worth doing if you want to, and they're good for 10 years. And there's a cost for that. There's a cost for the card that we talked, passport card.
The passport, I believe, don't etch this in stone, but I believe a passport's $110.
Okay.
And the passport card, if you get it at the same time you get your passport, I think it's $30. If you just get the passport card for the first time, you just get a passport card, it's $55. Okay. If you have a passport and you order a passport card, it's just $30 if you already have a passport.
Okay, $30. Now, and the Real ID will also have expense.
Yes.
That's going to have its own expense if you choose that route.
I think the Real, again, I don't etch this in stone, but I believe the Real ID is $48, and it's good for 10 years.
8 years.
8 years. Thank you.
Yeah.
There won't be a test at the end of this, because
there's so much information.
We probably thoroughly confused everybody watching, and my apologies. But I just want to take the time to explain Real ID.
Right.
And again, it's simple, but it's complicated.
Yes, and it's coming. You need to, by October 1st, 2020, make a decision if you do intend to fly or do. I think flying is going to be the most that you'll need it for.
It is.
Whether you do your passport, passport card, get a real ID, one of those three options is what you will need after October 1st of 2020 if you plan to fly or go to a base or what have you. Now, where are people going to go to get the real ID when it does roll out?
Well, right now it's at the circuit court clerk where you get your regular driver's license. Now, there's conversations about doing a Department of Motor Vehicles or DMV Division of Driver's License, or DMV's Division of Motor Vehicles. And there are conversations. So I don't right now we will assume it will be available, and after the first year, like I said, there is some bugs they're trying to work out with the system. So I don't want to get ahead of myself and tell you something that could change. So there's a lot of conversations about how to deal with Real ID, and that will be coming at a later date.
So we just wanted to today give you something to think about, because you want to start planning your options that are available to you now, and then when they do roll out officially to everybody in Marion, Washington, Nelson counties, or the rest of the state as well, of course, we will get back together again and let you know where and how all that's going to happen. But another thing we want to talk about is coming up in November.
That's correct.
On November 5th, we have a general election, and we have the state offices on the ballot, right?
The constitutional offices, yes.
For all the statewide, and then also in some of our counties, particularly in Marion County, we have a magisterial race as well as a school board race.
Correct.
And then in all three of our counties, Marion, Washington, and Nelson, we have a judge race. Is that correct?
Appeals court justice.
Appeals court
justice. Right, and so that will be on the ballot also. So you might want to do some studying on who's on those ballots, and the reason Gary and I are talking about this is to encourage everyone to please go vote.
Absolutely.
I go every year and talk to students and primarily fifth graders and talk to them about our form of government, and we are not a democracy. In a democracy, the majority always rules. Our founding fathers. Our Constitution sets forth a republic, and in a republic, people elect people to represent them. We assign our voting rights to our elected officials. Our elected officials, I work for you and those in the listening audience, so those people in my district, and that's the way the system's set up. So when you actually on election day, when you go vote, you're actually hiring somebody to work for you. You're voting on who you want to work for you, and so it's very important. And the sad thing is, Gary, is that election day this year, this is for all these constitutional offices. Voter turnout will probably be 30% or less, and that's. It's kind of sad that no more people take an interest in going to vote than that, but that's the way it is now. One of the things we have talked about over the years, and it comes up every legislative session, is to move the governor's race to either to one of the even year elections. That we'll have elections again in 2020 next fall. Of course, we couldn't do it then, and then you have 2022. You'll have elections, where state representatives, state senators, U.S. senators, and U.S. representatives are on the ballot. So we've talked about moving the gubernatorial race to one of those even years where we get more voter participation than in the odd year like we have now, where that's the only thing on the ballot. And so we've talked about that. That requires a constitutional amendment. And, I think we passed a constitutional amendment back in something like 1996, somewhere in there. Paul Patton was the first governor to succeed himself, and we pushed his election to the odd year. away from the even year. So we've been doing this for quite some time, and again, the participation in the gubernatorial race has not always been good. So that talk's out there, and you'll hear about that again probably this next session. But you know, the main thing was just talk about is encourage everyone to mark it on your calendar and please go vote on November the 5th.
Absolutely. And we encourage everybody to get out there. And also, you can watch on Channel 6 television. We do have our Political Focus program going on for the next month or so, where some of the different candidates are coming in for interviews. So you get to know some of the people who are running for office. So you can hopefully we can help you if you don't already know who they are. If they're not the incumbent, you may not know who they are. It gives you the opportunity to meet some of them. So,
yeah, and we'll mention this, you know, a little over a month from today, November 11th is Veterans Day. And of course, you know, when we talk about elections, a lot of brave men and women have given their lives to make sure we had that right to go vote. So we want to remember those veterans that have sacrificed a lot. We want to remember them on Veterans Day. Sunday, November the 10th, here at the Lebanon National Cemetery at 2 o'clock is our Veterans Day ceremony here in Marion County. And then Friday, November the 8th, I think it's at 1 o'clock in the afternoon at Marion County High School. There's a Veterans Day program there. So, and also I know Bloomfield and New Haven both have theirs on November the 11th at 11 a.m. So I know those two communities. I'm not exactly sure when the Barstown when their ceremony is, but I do Bloomfield and New Haven always have theirs on November the 11th at 11 a.m.
Yeah, Cecil does a nice job with that.
Yes, 11th month, 11th day at the 11th hour. So, so anyway, they do have very nice. These small communities have very nice Veterans Day ceremonies, and it's a good way to thank the veterans for their service and keep that. You know, it's very fitting that we set aside time. Every day should be Veterans Day. We need to thank a veteran every day, but that one special day a year to honor those veterans. And then, of course, Memorial Day, we honor those who gave their life in defense of the country.
Absolutely.
So, good stuff, Gary.
Absolutely.
Good stuff.
So again, November the 5th is Election Day. Please go out and vote. And also keep thinking about the Real ID. We'll keep you updated when we find out when it's actually going to start rolling out here in Kentucky. But in the meantime, if you already have a passport, you might want to get your passport card, or you might want to get a passport. Different ideas, but it is October 1st, 2020, when you're going to have something.
Yeah, if I've thoroughly confused you and you want me to explain it, please feel free to give me a call. My home number is 270-692-6945. The Kentucky Standard's very good about putting that in the paper at least once a week, and I think the Lebanon Enterprise has it in there also. And when I do a column, what's the Enterprise and Kentucky Standard are both very good about printing my columns when I write one, and my home phone number is on those also. And then, of course, you know, Facebook Messenger and email and all those other ways to communicate with me. So do not hesitate to reach out to me if you have a question about Real ID or any other issue.
Great. Again, I've been talking with State Senator Jimmy Higdon. This is Gary White with Channel 6 Central Kentucky Television. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate it.